Hey guys, hope you're having a great day. Tim here, doing a little video for you on a Saturday because today is somewhat of an important day in the lives of a lot of folks, especially not just those of us in real estate, but really as a country, because today is July 31st and the eviction moratorium ends today. Now, that is going to be something that is going to affect the lives of could be tens of thousands of people, if not more. And we're talking about renters as well as landlords and really society as a whole. If you stop to think about the ramifications of the eviction moratorium coming to an end, there's a lot of folks that are going to be affected, and that's what I wanted to talk about really quickly. So you probably know this, the eviction moratorium that the CDC put into place back in September is scheduled to expire tonight. Now, what that means is the eviction moratorium was put in place by the CDC to prevent landlords from evicting tenants who were unable to pay their rent. Now, it was somewhat of a trickle down. You know, when COVID hit, a lot of businesses shut down. A lot of folks couldn't work. Of course, if you can't work, you can't get a paycheck. If you can't get a paycheck, you may not be able to pay your mortgage, or not your mortgage, but your rent. And so rather than see those folks evicted, the CDC stepped in, and I think the Supreme Court now has decided that they really did not have the right to do this, but they did it anyway. They stepped in and said no one could be evicted because of non-payment of rent if COVID was the reason that they lost their income. There's a lot of paperwork that had to be filled out. Tenants just couldn't call up and say, hey, I'm affected by COVID. They had to file paper. They had to send a letter to the landlord, and then the landlords had to comply. And as someone in real estate who knows a lot of landlords, I can tell you it was kind of a hard hit, because the landlords, unless they got a forbearance on the property, continued to have to make the payment on the property even though they were not getting any income. But I can see what the CDC was doing. I mean, the purpose of this was the fear that with the pandemic raging, if someone was evicted from their home, they would either have to move in with family, move in with friends, maybe even go to a homeless shelter, and that meant the risk for spreading the COVID virus was even greater. So the CDC stepped in, did the moratorium. Like it or not, it was put into place, and now it is expiring. And so I wanted to just take a minute to talk about what this could mean for, again, tenants, landlords, and really society as a whole. Because again, this is going to touch a lot of people, not just those directly involved, but those who are really just on the periphery, and really those that are just part of society as a whole that may know someone who is going through this. And so that's what I wanted to talk about. So, you know, the eviction moratorium, it prevented eviction because of unpaid rent, but it did not forgive the rent that was owed. So if you were a tenant and let's say you were paying $500 a month, well, September, October, November, December, January, February, March, April, May, June, July, August, 12 months. So that's going to be 500 times 12. That's $6,000 that you are now behind in rent. And again, the moratorium did not say, hey, you get to live here rent-free. It basically said that your rent is going to be set aside for the time being, but it is still due. So now that the moratorium is ending, there are a lot of landlords out there who are going to be owed, could be a year's worth of rent. And so the question becomes, what happens now that the moratorium is gone? The eviction process can now take place for non-payment of rent. What's going to happen? Are we going to have just an onslaught of evictions? Are we going to have all of these people who are suddenly homeless? What is going to happen? And, you know, it's going to be an ugly situation regardless, because there are those landlords, you know, well, let's back up. Let's talk about what the landlords can do. What your option is, if you are a landlord that was affected by the moratorium, it's now over, you are owed 12 months worth of back rent or 11 months, whatever, what can you do? Well, you've got options. The number one, if you like the tenant and you don't want to have to replace that tenant, maybe you can work with them somehow. You got to keep in mind, not everybody has an extra $5,000 or $6,000 set aside that they can just give you in a lump sum. Most of the folks who were affected by the moratorium are folks that were maybe living paycheck to paycheck. It was basically all they could do to pay their rent in the first place. They certainly don't have that saved up for you now. So if you are a landlord, your options are maybe you work with the tenant. If this tenant is someone that you feel is well-intentioned and will get things caught up, maybe not in a lump sum, but maybe you raise the rent. Maybe you defer some of that for a period. Maybe you set up a payment schedule. You are willing to work with that tenant so you do not have to evict them. Keep in mind, when you evict a tenant, you got to go find another tenant. Chances are you may have to go in, do some fix-up, do some paint, whatever, to the property, so you're going to have to put some money into it. But then you're going to have to find another tenant. And if you've got a good tenant, why not work with them, if at all possible, to work this out? The other option that you have, of course, is you can now start eviction proceedings against the tenant. And if you're a landlord, you probably already know this, or at least you should. You do not evict the tenant. The courts evict the tenant. There's a process that you have to go through, which we'll talk about in a minute. But you cannot just say, you owe me 12 months worth of rent, you're going to be evicted now, and I'm going to file suit. That's the other thing you can do. You can always go to court and sue someone for back rent. I got to tell you, I think on Monday the courts are going to be so backed up with eviction notices that things are going to take a while to sort out. So again, as a landlord, you do have options. I know some landlords may want to evict, especially if you are in a market like ours here in Huntsville, because you can probably get more rent. Now, that opens up a whole moral, ethical argument that we're not going to go into here. But again, if you're the property owner, you do have rights as the property owner. And, it is up to you what you do. Now, if you are a tenant, what are your options? Well, it all comes down to the money that you owe, whether or not you would like to stay in the property. My guess is you really don't want to have to pack up and leave and find another place to live. So if you are willing to somehow work out the rent shortage with the landlord, that's certainly something that I would try to work through. If I was on either side of this, if I was a landlord or a tenant, I would do my best to work this out and figure out a way where if I'm the landlord, I recoup, maybe not all of the rent owed to me, maybe a part of it. Sometimes you just do things because it's the right thing to do. But then again, there's the old tenet, hey, it's just business. So I can't advise you either way. I'm not in that situation. I sold all my rental property when the market took off. So fortunately, I'm not in this position, but I know a lot of folks who are. So if you are the tenant, I would hopefully hopefully you've been in communication with your landlord all along. So I would just sit down and say, look, I don't want to move my family out of this property. I really want to stay here. I understand that we are behind this much in rent. It is my intention to make you whole. How can we work this out within my financial wherewithal to do so? Hopefully you've gone back to work. You've got some income now, and hopefully you'll be able to at least present something to the landlord where you can work it out. And again, if you're a landlord, you have the option of working it out, or you have the option of doing an eviction. So let's talk a little bit about the process of evicting a tenant here in the state of Alabama. An eviction can typically take 1 month to several months, depending on whether the eviction is for non-payment of rent or another type of conviction, whether there's a conveyance or an appeal. And the other type of conviction, if the tenant is doing something they shouldn't be doing in the property, or you've got just cause. But it's going to take anywhere from 1 to several months. Again, I believe that we're going to see a lot of evictions being filed on Monday. I think the courts are going to be backed up, so it may take even longer than that. The only way a landlord can remove a tenant from a rental unit is by winning an eviction lawsuit. Again, you can't just show up at the door and say, I want you to get out of my property. You would be opening yourself up to legalities or to legal repercussions then. So you don't evict the tenant. Evictions are done by the court and by a law officer, usually a sheriff's deputy, that sort of thing. So the process is this. You have to terminate. So the process is this. To terminate the lease, you must give the tenant notice first, and that's a 7-day notice. All right. In all situations, regardless of whether it is for just cause or for a lack of rent, you have to serve that tenant notice that they have 7 days to catch up the rent, make it whole, or to remedy the situation. And if you don't do that within 7 days, then you file a complaint with the court. All right. You give them 7 days to remedy the situation. Then you have to file a complaint with the court. The court will then send that tenant a notice that there has been a complaint filed, and then the tenant has 7 days to respond to court. Now, if they don't respond, they are in danger of forfeiting, and the decision will be made in the landlord's favor. If they do want to argue against eviction, they will respond to the court within 7 days. The tenant will. There will be a hearing, and the judge will usually make a decision pretty quickly. And if there is a writ of execution posted, well, then the tenant is going to have to get their belongings and get out, because a member of law enforcement will be there within a certain amount of time and evict them from the property. So it's not something that happens quickly. Again, the initial notice period, 7 days. They've got 7 days to answer. Then there's the court hearing. Once the writ of execution is established, then they have 7 days to vacate the property. If they do not vacate, then the sheriff's deputy or someone from law enforcement will be there to see that they are evicted. And that's a really sad situation if that happens. So again, my advice to landlords and to tenants is open that line of communication. Sit down, talk about the situation, look at what is owed, look at how the money can be paid back. Again, maybe you raise the rent a little bit every month. Maybe you do some other separate payment plan. Maybe you give them more time. And I think that's one of the things that I would encourage all of my landlord buddies to do is be patient. You know, if you want to keep that tenant in place, work with them, figure it out. But again, you're the owner of the property. You are within your legal right to do the eviction. And again, if you are the tenant, I would do my best to work it out. Because remember, if you are evicted, that doesn't mean you don't have to pay back the money. That just means you have to vacate the property. Okay, if you're on the line for past rent, that landlord can still file a suit against you and try to collect that. So it's going to be a very interesting time. I'm hoping that it can be worked out among folks, but again, I'm a realist. I do believe that there's going to be mass evictions. I think we're going to see people put out on the street because they're not going to have much option to do anything else. So let me know what your thoughts are. I'm always interested to hear from folks who are on both sides of the fence. If you are a tenant who is going to be at risk of eviction because you have not paid the rent, and if you're a landlord who has property or properties that have these tenants in them. What are your plans? What do you plan to do? And what do you think is the best course of action? All right. So anyway, guys, we all got to get along. We've only got one planet to live on. Let's do the best we can to get along and make it a good day. All right. That's it. If I can do anything for you, let me know. 679-0704 is my number. Tim@revolve.com is my email address. And again, it's going to be a sticky situation, but I encourage patience and tolerance, and maybe we will get this worked out. All right, that's it. Get out. Have a great day. Talk to you soon.